Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. What if you were told reason and questioning can take your faith away? Contraception is a sin, homosexuality is a sin, wearing makeup is a sin, or even having a TV is a sin. These are just a few of the teachings of Laestadianism. My conversation with Helena was a chilling but inspiring discussion. Prior to our conversation, I had never heard of Laestadianism. I now imagine the Laestadian church to be like the town that Kevin Bacon moved to in Footloose, except this is real and there is no dancing at the end. I am inspired by Helena's courage and strength and urge everyone to please listen with an open mind to this controversial episode. If you are uncomfortable listening to discussions involving the criticism of religion or sexual abuse, then this is not the episode for you. However, this is a fascinating interview that sheds light on my guest's struggle with Laestadianism and her personal journey to leave the Laestadian church. Please listen with an open mind and share this podcast with others that you think might find this episode interesting. If you have questions or comments, please do not hesitate to reach out at Mimi at culturechatpodcast.com or on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Without further ado, please meet Helena Lucia. Thank you so much for joining me today, Helena.
No problem. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So I was fascinated when I heard your story. I honestly don't know much about a lot of religions, but I definitely had never heard of Laestadianism. When I heard your story, this was the first time I'd heard of Laestadianism, and I was really fascinated by it. I mean, of course, in this day and age, we are exposed to a wide range of religions of, different facets. And I think having more beliefs and faith is a good thing. However, in your situation, hearing your story, I was really inspired by the strength and, the independence and just how you kind of came out at the end of it. If you want to share maybe a little information about the religion itself so our listeners can kind of understand and get a picture of what it was like to grow up with these belief systems.
Sure, absolutely. So Laestadianism is based out of, like you said, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Northern Europe. And what happened is in the turn of the century, it was a very depraved time for that area. It was very economically depressed. And a man named Laestadius, who was a botanist at the time, pretty educated man, also a Sami, started a religion, and he based it loosely off of Lutheranism. Here in the U.S., we call it Lutheranism quite a bit, but it's really not the most accurate use of the word because it looks very, very different from most Lutheran churches. There's a huge stress around dress, especially what women wear. Women have to wear dresses. Hairstyles have to be very plain. Scarves are worn over the head in churches. People are commanded not to listen to the radio, sometimes not to use the internet, not to watch television, music, dancing, all of that. It's very much like growing up Amish, but being able to use electricity and things like that. So somewhere in the middle, maybe people might be more familiar with like Pentecostal, like really extreme Pentecostal religions.
And so that extreme, it seems like their goal is kind of to seclude you from the outside world, quote unquote. I mean, you are allowed to go to school, public school. I mean, do they have their own private schools and things like that?
No, that is one thing that I'm actually very grateful for is that we were not secluded from the outside world in the way of going to public schools. The only thing, like here in Battleground, Washington, I live in Vancouver, Washington, and here in Battleground, Washington, there's a community where almost the majority of students in the school are from that religion. So in that way, it is very, very secluded. But yes, absolutely, you're taught that other people that are not part of the church are worldly people, which is most people would think of as a good thing, but they do not. And that they believe they are the only ones going to heaven. And other people are dangerous. Even people that are relatives that have left the religion are now become dangerous. And there's a large pressure not to speak with those people. So it's very secluded.
Yeah. So when you're in church or when they're preaching to you and telling you things, basically, I grew up Catholic, so there's a lot of guilt involved there, but what are the methods they use to make I'm fascinated by the fact that in this day and age, with so much exposure to information and knowledge, that there's still kind of a heavy following for a lot of these type of organizations and churches and sects and cults and whatnot. But what do they make you be afraid of, or is it guilt or?
So there is definitely a lot of guilt and shame. There's the idea that we are made of sin, that we're original sin, that we are not supposed to use our intellect because that would be like following the devil. That's dangerous to think that you can understand the Bible for yourself without the help of the preachers. So there's definitely a lot of obscuring things and then making it, using the guilt and fear and control to keep people under the influence, I guess, of that religion. Because as soon as people start asking questions, as soon as people start going out and getting information, like you said, that breaks down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I read that they said one of the big thoughts is that reason will take your faith away. So it's kind of making you feel like, it's beyond wrongdoing, that the outside world is corrupt and you're basically not, I guess, is accepted by God.
Absolutely. And even when you do try to do every single thing right and you try to obey their precepts and things, they also still have a belief that you could lose your faith in an instant. So there's just a solid amount of fear built in pretty heavily. I remember when I was a kid really feeling scared about that because I thought, well, what would happen if I just lost my faith and then I died, and then what would happen to me?
Yeah. So there's a lot of fear in that afterlife. Basically, they kind of preach to you about the whole heaven and hell thing. Definitely.
And even to the point where they feel like our time here on earth is not supposed to be happy. It's not supposed to be fun. We're just living in this veil of sorrow. And what we're looking forward to is this great afterlife. We might get it. We might not get it. No one really knows. It's very, very, it's very depressing when you're part of it.
Yeah. So you were born, and are you guys baptized in this faith, or how does that work?
Yeah. So the infants are baptized at birth or a very young age. Usually, with a healthy baby, it'd be the first time they go to church after the baby's born, which is actually super quick. I mean, most people go to church the next Sunday after they have a baby. So, and my youngest brother passed away when he was 2.5 days old. And my grandfather actually came to the hospital and baptized him in the hospital. So baptism is a very important tenet.
I see. And so as you go through, I guess, different sacraments and steps, and because I read that's kind of like a process. And as you get older, then you're now a teenager. That's usually the age of exploration and where thoughts start to wander. Was that kind of when you started to question things, or were you still in fear at that point?
So I was always very logical, and the way that I grew up was my parents had left the larger church and started their own small sect when I was actually in my mom's stomach. So I grew up in a very, very small church where everyone in the religion were my first cousins. And basically it was just, we met in homes. It was a very, very tiny church. And I had always listened to them talk about the other church in the way that I just somehow logicked in my mind that one or the other was the correct one. And this one probably wasn't it because there was only, 40 or 50 people there. So I decided, well, I'll go back to the other one. So that was when I was a teenager. I had friends at the other church and I just started attending it. And I didn't really think about it much beyond there. I always asked questions. I just have always been an inquisitive person. And so my parents always felt like I was a very rebellious child because I asked a lot of questions. And I think that that's ultimately the reason why I reasoned that they probably weren't on the path because they wouldn't answer my questions.
And what was the repercussions like for when you basically now not just leaving your, that sect of the religion, but you were also leaving your parents' leadership?
I think that at that time I was pretty independent. So I had already started college when I was 16, and I was kind of like I wasn't living with my parents full time then.
I see.
And so there wasn't that, there were already, the repercussions had already been felt, I guess, because I was kind of on my own.
I see. So were you estranged for them, or you still like met up for holidays, or what kind of relationship?
I've never been very close with my parents, so we've never had the kind of relationship where they've actively tried to like get to know me. My dad is a very angry person, and so he kind of creates an environment where he controls the family with his anger. And so it's always been kind of tense. So, I go to their house from time to time, but it was more obligatory than it was kind of a family dynamic where everyone's hanging out and enjoying each other's company.
I see. So as a young child, you had the fear of God, a fear of going to hell, and also, in a way, fear of your parent.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of amazing to me, actually, that you were able to be so logical when everything in your life was kind of coming in, all that negative energy and all that fear. Or maybe that's what kind of backed you up against the wall to say, wait, this.
Yeah. And it took a lot of years of therapy to figure out how that fear was influencing the decisions of my life and stuff like that. So I've had a lot of work to do.
Right. But that's after, of course, you weren't getting the help at that time.
No. Yeah, that's true.
How many siblings do you have?
I am the number 6 of 10.
And I'm understanding that is very common in this religion to have a lot of children.
Sure. The idea is that God controls your fertility. And so however many children he gives you is how many he wants you to have.
I see. So obviously it's no contraception or birth control.
Not unless some people will use contraception if there's a medically accepted reason. My parents did not do that. So my mom always had blood clots. She was always on bed rest for her entire pregnancies almost, especially towards the end there. And the doctors kept telling her she needs to stop having babies. It's dangerous for her health. But she did not choose to do that. Other people within, at least, especially the old Apostolic Lutheran Church, if they have a medically accepted reason, they will go ask the preachers if that could be condoned by the preachers, basically. And if they do, they will use birth control. So there are different schools of thought on that, but definitely not just that you aren't ready to be a parent. Maybe you're too tired. Maybe you're feeling depressed. None of those reasons are
valid
strong.
in their eyes.
Sure.
I see. And so
it's a very, very terrifying experience not to be in control of your own fertility, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's a fight for that right now.
Absolutely. There's a huge fight for that. And that's the other thing with my family now is we're definitely way on the opposite sides of the spectrum on a lot of that thought. So even though many of my siblings have left the religion of our parents, I still am kind of pretty far out for them to connect with on certain political and religious beliefs.
I see. So because they still kind of maintain a little bit of those same beliefs and morals in their eyes.
Yeah, they're still very Christian. They're very Republican and kind of conservative based. And I'm not any of those things.
I see. So you're once again still the outcast within your family.
Yes, somewhat. I'm not the only outcast, but I am an outcast.
Well, there's 10 of you. So there's a good percentage there that you'll have some fellowship.
Yes.
That's good to know. And so the expectation is, like you said, just to have children when God wants you to have them. But does that mean any time, or do you have to be married?
Definitely are supposed to be married to have sex. That's one of the clauses. Not very many people necessarily hold to that. So there's a lot of weddings that happen, right in there in that time. Short engagements are definitely a thing. I mean, the people are engaged, a few months, not real long, because they don't want to encourage you to, be tempted to have sex early.
Mm-hmm. So essentially there's a lot of teenage, like maybe 18, 19-year-olds getting married then.
Yeah. Yes. And it used to be even younger. I think recently there have been some judges who put the kibosh on that. So you have to go into, at least here in Washington, you have to go, I believe under 18, you have to go ask a judge and get their sign off, and you have to have the approval from your parents or something. And like less judges are saying that's kosher.
Right. Yeah.
Recently.
I see. So has the trend then, and also we'll kind of get back on track with your life. So, you were married at a young age as well, 19, actually. And then you had shared with me, you had the 4 kids by the time you're 25.
Right.
So at what point did you feel this, whole lifestyle, this whole, religion, because you were still in the church at the time? Sure.
So at what point did I feel like it wasn't for me?
Yeah. At what point did you feel it wasn't for you, that you just, because right now, obviously you're not a part of that church in any way.
Right.
So at what point was there a breaking point for you, or was it, after your 4th child and you just said, this is too much?
Well,
not to put it on your 4th child, but
no, I'm sure she'd be gladly take that though. I think it was pretty gradual. I did leave when I was expecting her. So that was my final break. It had been probably about a year and a half that I had been fairly confident that I didn't believe in the things that they were saying. I didn't feel like I needed to get all of my edicts in life from the preachers. But the real thing that was stopping me was I didn't want to create that kind of tension in my marriage. There was already a lot of tension. He had become aware that I no longer believed in the religion, and really wanted me to continue playing the game and coming with him, and at least giving it like a front that we were a unified family in that religion. Ultimately, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was just being a part of many conversations where I was no longer lying by omission, but I almost had to be dishonest, or I actually had to be dishonest to my own viewpoint to contribute to the conversation and not to make it sound problematic. So if people were talking about other people or about other tenets of their beliefs, if you don't say anything, you're saying something. And if you do say something, you're going to have to go against your belief system unless your beliefs are in lockstep with theirs.
I see. So you basically, it sounds like, and from what I've read, that there's a lot of congregating in people's homes, and you are supposed to
Definitely
be very social with one another and have a lot of time talking. So can you give me an example of like a discussion that one would have in these meetings or gatherings?
Sure. So if you were talking about somebody that didn't believe in the church or something, and you're supposed to like call that person a worldly person and refer to these people as Christians, and talk about like how important it is that we just hold tight to our true and living faith and all this stuff, and about having doubts, because having doubts to them that's a very sinful behavior. And to us, like having doubts about something, that's really powerful. You can have doubts about things, and that makes you question your belief system and question your preconceived notions or whatever. But so those are the types of conversations that people enter into regularly, or just speaking about someone who doesn't go to the church, or talking about how to handle your kid telling someone else that they're going to hell. And then you as a conversation participant, they're like, well, it is really sad because, it is true. They are going to hell or whatever. And you can't really voice your opinion or just say, why don't you stop teaching your kid to be an asshole or whatever. Like, you can't say that without putting a big red target on your forehead.
So it got to a point where you realized you were just lying all the time, which is the irony, right? You're in quote unquote a religion. You're not supposed to lie. Yeah. But so then you decided this isn't for you. And how did your husband take it? How did the congregation take it? Well, I mean, you have kids at that point. I'm imagining it's quite a struggle.
So I just told him one Saturday night that I was not going to church with him the next morning, and furthermore, I wouldn't be going anymore. He was very angry. He didn't speak to me for, I think, a couple of weeks, but he did at that time tell people, which I was glad about, because up until then he wouldn't tell anyone because he had an idea that I would change my mind, that I could whatever. And so he did tell people, and what happens in that religion when you do leave is that they sort of like mob you. They, first of all, news travels fast. Like, it was not even a day before people that I knew on the East Coast knew about me leaving. So it was very fast. So basically what ends up happening is your phone won't stop ringing, your doorbell won't stop ringing. Their people are coming over and they're trying to put on emotional pressure for you to change your mind or to explain to them what's going on or that kind of stuff. And I wasn't quite ready to do that. So I did a lot of ignoring the door and ignoring my phone calls. So I had conversations with different friends, different walks of life. Some people really did understand. There are a lot of people, believe it or not, that are still there that covertly don't agree with what's going on. And so there was a lot of like, yeah, I know where you're coming from. I understand. There was a lot of people who really put on a lot of pressure for me to come back. And then once they figure out you're not coming back, then they just back away and talk about you. and basically like, so it's kind of a rush and then drought. And so now all of a sudden your community that's around you is leaving you alone. But then 6 months after I left, my ex-husband actually left the church as well. And then I got another round of that, and it was kind of like from his family really putting it all on me and really being angry with me because I had taken their son away and now they're grandkids and they probably would, none of us will now go to heaven because of me. So that was pretty rough, but
they basically are trying to save you, essentially. Exactly. When the rush is coming in, they think they're able to save you and keep you in the community. But once they know there's no saving you, you're now one of those worldly people and you're an outcast.
It actually is even worse because if you were in the church and then you're gone, and especially if you have the audacity to say anything negative about the church, and now you're an evil worker. So you're not just a worldly person, but you're actually evil worker. And so there's that piece of it as well. So you're sort of treated with less respect than people who have never been part of the religion.
I see. So you're really disdained at that point.
Yeah. So it's basically, you're right. They try to save you. And then once they figure out they can't, they kind of just chew you up and spit you out.
Right. Well, and in your case, you'd say good riddance. But was there any legal ramifications for you? Because, I mean, obviously you have children, and I mean, I'm guessing they don't condone divorce in this religion, or do they? Or was there a struggle with that?
No, they don't. So not for me. Because by the time I got divorced, we had both left the religion. But I have a lot of friends who left, as one partner left, and then the other partner did not leave, and that gets really dicey because basically all the church members rally around to support the person who did not leave. Generally speaking, they paint the other person with one of a couple brushes. One might be that person is a drug addict or has a drinking problem, or that the other person's crazy, or oftentimes I've seen both, and they end up really helping the person who has not left the church gain custody so that the kids souls aren't in danger or whatever in their mind, and it ends up being a real attack against the other person, and can be really problematic, because a lot of judges will see that family support and see it looks so glossy and great from the outside, and really feel like that person must be a really solid person and the other person must not know what they're doing. I have a friend who recently got divorced, and she asked the judge not to let her children go over to a couple people's houses that have been notorious in the religion for being pedophiles, and the judge would not give her that. He would not condone that for her, because it was the same kind of a situation. She had left the church. Everyone was rallying around him. He worked really hard to make her look bad in court. And the judge the judge really didn't respect a lot of the things that she was asking for because of that. So dynamic.
Yeah. So they had already painted her as like irresponsible, and her character was already ruined by it. And so now her kids are basically at risk.
Exactly. And her character was being maligned, and she knows now that her kids have been going to those homes, and she doesn't really know what to do about that because she didn't have the support of the judge by that time.
Well, I'm sure I can speak for most people when I share that, pedophiles, I have absolutely no tolerance for. I don't think anybody does, but it's amazing because there seems to be a recurring theme across a lot of religions with sexual abuse with children and within the church. And I'm sure there's a lot of psychology studies out there as to why that happens. And we were speaking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned in a closed society that this is a very common problem.
Sure. And especially when it's an us against them world, because I know that we had one experience where my daughter was molested by a fellow person in the church, and we went and spoke with the preachers, and they told us not to go to the police. And years later, we went and talked to the sheriff's department, and we talked to a couple lawyers and things about the way that they do that in the church, because it's very common. A lot of people have experiences with sexual abuse, and most of the time, the advice of the preachers is not to go to the police. Some people disregard that very bravely, but it's very common for them to tell you that. And here in Washington, unfortunately, we're not a client. Clergy is not, a mandatory reporter? So clergy is not mandatory reporters. So they're not required to, if they find out about sexual abuse, they're not required to turn that into the law, which I think is wrong. I think every state, everybody should be a mandatory reporter. That's not. If you find out about a law being broken, you should take care of that, especially against a small child. But be that as it may, since they're not a mandatory reporter, they're not required to report, but it's illegal for them to tell you not to go to the police because that's considered obstruction of justice. And so that's one thing that they do. Even in my own experience, that they should not do, and that's illegal, even if they were to choose to not report it.
I see. So it's very good. Hopefully, if anybody is listening that has that situation or that they have rights, it's important to remember you have rights, and then you can be empowered. And, like you did, you went to the authorities, and it's absolutely something that needs to be spoken about. I think it gets swept under the rug way too often.
Definitely. And you're not doing even the perpetrator any favors by not holding them accountable for their actions, because we already know that happens, that continues to happen. It's not something that a church can forgive and brush under the rug and have it never creep out again.
Of course, we don't have the answers to this, but it's ironic, the people at the church and the congregation is lying to destroy the character of the person who's leaving. And so they lose their children. Now their kids could possibly be at risk. And then to know that a pedophile is probably one of the worst crimes or sins, or however you want to say it, that one could possibly do, yet they're covering it up all the time.
Oh, there's a huge irony with a lot of that stuff. I mean, my cousin had a really rough teenage years because she had had a really rough childhood experience, and she spent a couple years working as a prostitute. And when she was arrested for prostitution, it turned out to be one of the greatest things that she'd ever happened to her, because she then went through therapy. But when my parents found out that she had been arrested, they prevented us from being around her. And I think that's so fascinating, because they prevented us from being around her, but they put us in the presence with people that they knew were dangerous to children.
Exactly.
So that to me is just the consummate irony right there.
Yeah, it's jaw-dropping, really.
Yeah.
I'm a little at a loss for words. I mean, we've been talking a lot about these things in theory. I mean, did you ever experience anything that you would, of course, be willing to share that, is one of those things that you just wouldn't want, for your kids, and is that probably somewhere in their subconscious was a motivator for why you didn't want this for your family? But was there any hardships that you had faced personally?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, I was molested in my childhood several times throughout the years. I also suffered from physical violence. My dad took discipline to a whole new level. In my marriage, I definitely had a lot of emotional and control, financial control, and even some physical violence. So I definitely went through a lot. Basically, any kind of abuse that you could list was a part of our family system.
Wow.
So yeah, I have been through all of that, and that's definitely a motivating factor for why I want my kids to grow up as empowered, strong young women and men, and yeah, definitely want to help them not have to suffer the same things, to see healthy relationships. I do have a very healthy relationship with my boyfriend. We've been together for 6.5 years, I think. And they really see a solid relationship here and a good family. His family is really strong and really healthy. And so I really feel like they've been fortunate to be able to see that, and they will require more from their relationships than I did mine.
Well, that's all thanks to you, of course.
Well, it's been a lot of years of hard work, but I definitely feel like I'm on the other side.
Yeah, you are definitely an inspiration for sure. I mean, it's obviously you've done a lot of work to, get to the emotional place that you are, where you can just talk about it and be so open. And like I said, thank you so much for sharing, because I'm hoping if people hear these things, they feel empowered too for whatever struggles they may be going through. It may not necessarily be to the unfortunate extremity of what you've endured, but I think a lot can be said for the fact that you've been through so much, and look at where you are now. I mean, you're a software engineer. You went to college. You did all these things that you never thought, probably when you were that small child, just learning about fear, that you never thought you could do.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I've overcome a lot of things. I also know that there are a lot of other people in the world who've overcome even larger things. So it's all kind of a continuum, but I have worked really hard to get where I am, and I have a great job and I have a great family, and I'm glad that I left when my kids were young so that they wouldn't have years of that whole guilt and shame system to slough off.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some statistic or whatnot, but I mean, does it seem like there's a high percentage then of people, I guess, I don't know, just men, or is it mostly women that have gone through a lot of this molestation and abuse that you've endured?
In my experience, I would say about 75% of people that I've talked to have been, at least women, have been molested as children.
Wow.
In that religion, or at least have almost 100% that definitely have some personal experience, a personal touch with it,
right.
Whether or not it's that they themselves were molested, but maybe that their younger sister was, or their a family member, or they were exposed to it in some way.
And so since they do obviously talk about it, is it something that's, this was a year ago, this happened, or do you guys have a support system within the community that deals with this? Or is it very Like, don't talk about it? Or, I mean, how does it?
I would say the most common comment that I've heard from people within the church would be like, well, it happened to me and it was no big deal, or it didn't affect me, or something like that. I actually was in therapy for 2 weeks, and my aunt asked me how long I was going to drag this out.
Wow.
So people don't really have a perspective of like how much damage that does to your psyche. And I think it's also because the damage that the church does with the guilt and the shame and all of that stuff, and especially for young women, shaming them about their sexuality and about their body and stuff like that. I think it has basically the same effect as sexual abuse does. It's a very, very similar.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really hard to detangle those two.
Yeah. I mean, when we started this conversation, you didn't really talk about the physical abuse so much. You were talking about the shaming and whatnot. So clearly that has, not that the abuse hasn't left a mark on you, but clearly that's like the first thing that comes to your mind is how deeply emotionally scarred they can make you. Like that, it's almost like you said, it's just as bad or it's equal to.
Yeah,
if not,
I think in some ways it can actually be worse because it's about who you intrinsically are as a person. When you're teaching someone like that, they are just like solid sin that they should just like carry all this shame and guilt. It's very core to who you are. If someone does something to you, if someone like hits you and you have a bruise, like it's pretty easy to say, wow, that person is a jerk. Like, look what happened here. And that's not okay.
Right.
But when someone's talking about who you are on the inside, that's a lot harder to detangle from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So are there people that you still know in that community, in that religion that you've tried to reach out to or give advice to, or what would you give someone in that situation? What type of advice, I guess, would you give?
I did reach out more early on, and I did try to help people and give people advice. I got kind of burnt by that because there were a lot of people who, remember I said that there were a number of people who are kind of on the fringe.
Yes.
But they will kind of vacillate back and forth. And when they go in, they end up sharing details of personal conversations with other people, and that ends up being hitting the rumor mill. And so I've just removed myself more from that and just put myself in a position where if other people want to reach out to me, I'm available. But I live far enough away from the community and stuff now. I don't see very many people very often. So I feel pretty removed. But what I would say to someone, if they're still pretty entrenched in that way, or they were struggling with their belief systems around that, is just to explore, like read about other schools of thought, read about other religions. Allow yourself to ask the questions that you have, because if there supposedly is this amazing God that created the universe and knows all these things, he's not too small to ask a question against. It's not going to hurt his feelings. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to ask all the questions that you have and get answers. And if you're not getting them there, then you can seek them out. There's a big wide internet. You can find other people.
Yeah, they can't stop you from the internet.
They can't anymore. They used to, but now with smartphones, there's just no way.
So there was restriction on.
Yes.
Because there's no TV and no, yeah.
Right. And so when I was in the religion, they told us that we weren't supposed to have internet unless we needed it for our jobs. And I had internet. And I had other people asking me why I had it and to like justify to them why I needed it. That's the other thing about being in a religion like that that's so controlling, is that other people don't have any boundaries. So they feel like they can come on into your lane and ask you if you're using birth control and things that people in the real world would consider too personal questions to be asking someone. They're willing to inquire anything.
Yeah. Wow. So I think it's really good for people to hear that this does still exist. This we were discussing earlier, and I don't mean to make light of it, but this like footloose, extreme world that you only quote unquote see in movies or you hear about. I mean, this is very much going on every day.
Yes, it definitely still exists in a lot of places, and even maybe in your next door neighbor's house. You know?
It fascinates me just because there's so much exposure to thought out there, from the internet to, just like you said, with the smartphones and just kids going to school. I mean, the things I hear them talking about these days, they're very much more informed. They're hearing a lot more. So it's incredible that this is still really kind of an issue. And I mean, I see it as an issue. I know some people would be offended. They think this is their faith and it's what's right. But I think it still comes down to what's right for you doesn't mean it has to be right for everyone else, and, imposing your ideas on others. But this clearly, to me, with child abuse going on and women with molestation, I mean, there just can't be anything good about it. Yeah,
it's a very misogynistic system. It's a very, male-centric, very controlling, and so that lends itself to the abusive dynamics that we talked about earlier in families, and it's just not a healthy environment to be in.
You've obviously been through a lot of challenges in your life, and I wonder, a lot of people go to church to find that peace. And the irony is, at your church, it was anything but peaceful. What do you do now to center yourself or find, peace?
Sure. So that church really does provide really good fellowship. And when you go through a life change or something, they really do rally around each other, help each other move and stuff like that. And I've struggled with some of that with, just developing like friendship communities. And a lot of my friendship communities come from places that I work and things like that. I do not go to church. I love sleeping in on Sunday mornings instead. I like to exercise. I like to meditate. I think that those are the things that help me feel peace on the inside in a way that I never felt that I never received from religion. Maybe some people do, but I haven't gotten there. So,
yeah. So, and you've obviously, like we said, and, so wonderfully have gotten yourself into like an amazing place, and your kids are doing well and you're doing well. So, congratulations on that. I think it's an incredible journey that you've, now you're starting, of course, in 2000, what was it? 1 was the best decision in the time of your life that you made. And you really have made a life for yourself. And I'm sure we'll continue on to do so many more amazing things.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's been such an inspiration, and your strength is incredible. And I will definitely always, have that in my mind.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.